you very much, Minister Clement. I'll be talking about leadership in my closing remarks at the end of the day, but when it comes to important transformational initiatives like open data is, obviously in government, leadership can come from anywhere, and typically it doesn't come from the top. And it's really wonderful to hear an inspirational speech like that. I'm sure we'll give everybody, there's a lot of action on Twitter as a result of that. 270,000 data sets, 21st century resource, opening up your mother's silverware. And I'm sure that will be very inspirational for a lot of people in this country who are working on harnessing and exploiting the new opportunity of information technology. So, moving along, our next speaker is John Weigelt, and he's the National Technology Officer for Microsoft Canada. And he's sort of at the intersection of policy and technology, and he's responsible in Microsoft Canada for helping governments and businesses think about 5 years down the road and understand the unintended consequences of technology. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what he has to say. John Weigelt, please welcome him.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here at the conference. And, I'm sure I'm in agreement with all of you around this idea that we have this enthusiasm, these great ideas that come that invigorate us and provide us an opportunity to reimagine or rethink about how we're doing things. We're so busy at work on a day-to-day basis that we often are simply looking at execution. I got to answer those emails. I got to respond to that. I got to change the way that I do our business. And we don't often take the opportunity to think, to imagine what's possible, to take ourselves and abstract ourselves out of the day-to-day work and imagine the potential of what can be done next. And so this morning, as you're away from your offices, as you're away from your emails, well, some of you are away from your emails, I invite you all to imagine the potential, to imagine the possible, to imagine what's next, and reimagine our society, because we've heard some of these great discussions, these great conversations. And I'd like to channel a little bit of Stephen Johnson, who wrote the book of Where Great Ideas Come From. And he talks about the adjacent possible, adjacent innovation. Think about those things you're seeing up here and see how you apply them to those tough challenges you have ahead of you. Now, often what happens when we're heads down and working hard, we get a chance for a breather and we look up and we say, well, where are we going to go? What direction are we going to go? And we can't underestimate the importance of having a vision, setting that North Star, setting that position of where we want to get to within the world. And in Canada, we're quite proud of the Olympic Games that we saw in Vancouver recently, where they set that North Star, own the podium. We're going to own the podium. We're going to win as many medals as we possibly can. And Minister Clement actually set the podium for us as we move forward in the digital economy. He set the stage and say, our goal for Canada is to have a world-leading digital economy, to be a nation that creates, uses, supplies advanced digital technologies and content to improve productivity at all sectors. And now you heard Mr. Clement talk about some of the innovative approaches that they had. So there's an online consultation. People could submit their ideas. There was a voting process where you could vote on particular ideas to get the community engaged, to have this conversation, to have this dialogue. Now, one of the things my wife bemoans is that I'm always on the road, traveling across the country, talking to people. A little bit of trivia, we're not in the camper taking the pickup truck across the country, but I do get the chance to talk to business leaders across the country and do get the chance to engage and have conversation and talk about technology, avoid the unintended consequences, determine how to innovate using those technologies. And so I asked them the question when I have the opportunity. I said, so how many people have heard about the consultations on the digital economy? And I asked them to show hands, and well, guess what happens? Not a lot of hands go up, one or two in the audience. And I kind of shake my head and I said, this is critically important to our future. It's critically important to everything that we do. And so then I asked the follow-on question, say, the digital economy. What are we talking about the digital economy? And what often pops to mind is the great work that we see happening in Montreal, great work we see happening in Toronto, Vancouver, Victoria, Winnipeg, around digital content, the gaming environments, the ability to stream media, and all those pieces that are commonplace in that term in the digital economy. We heard earlier this week around the use of online banking and technology in the IT sector. So we have a great familiarity around that. We understand how that's transformed that business. We heard from Canada Health Infoway and the electronic health record, how that's going to transform how we interact across the country. Now, these are those things that we've heard of before. We've kind of seen and we say, okay, that's digital economy. That makes sense to me. We expand into education. We see these great activities happening around the world with laptops around the community. I recall a conversation I had with a student from Le Pas, Manitoba. So that's on the north coast of Lake Winnipeg. And what was really, really interesting was to hear how they were using a variety of different devices, everywhere from a small, pocketable game device to a full-fledged laptop, transforming how they had that learning environment. So being able to use these tools to transform that whole pedagogical approach, the learner, the student relationship. Again, these are all things that we've talked about today during this conference. But let's take a step further. So as we've walked into the conference today, we've noticed that Montreal has a booming construction industry. We've seen some of the cranes and the towers being built up. But did any of you notice that little white trailer beside the construction site? A few of you may have noticed it, and you see someone coming in and out of forum, those nice white hard hats. What's in that trailer? So you might say a lunch table. You might say a coffee machine, a water machine, maybe a telephone. Did you know there's a server in that building? And that server is there for the electricians and the plumbers to take a look at electronic blueprints to figure out are there wires going through that pipe? Or is there water going through that pipe? And so now we see this field where we once believed it's completely trades and non-IT related, now getting technology enabled. We hear about the boom happening up in Alberta, Fort McMurray, and the contract drillers up there. Very, very active community, a lot of Canadians moving in and out of that environment. There are servers at the wellheads to manage the personnel relationships, that whole engagement side of individuals moving in and out of that marketplace. Combines in the fields, GPS controlled, with robotic catchers behind them. Another IT digitally enabled economy. The mining industry. I can go on and on, all 70 different categories within the Industry Canada's ratings of different industries. They're all IT enabled. And so as we start to talk about the digital economy, enabling the digital economy, perhaps we should look beyond STEM. Perhaps we should make a bigger effort to look beyond IT and reimagine our economy digitally. Now, this has significant implications. This has significant implications as we have that dialogue, we have that conversation with those leaders, those innovators, those entrepreneurs in our communities. It also has significant implications for our policymakers. Are we putting in policies that remove friction for Canadian business and international business? Because what we're seeing now in this age of ease of use of computing, policy friction is now becoming a differentiator for where businesses locate and how businesses compete on the global scene. So we need to reimagine that economy digitally. As we look across the environments, one of the things that intrigues me is that there's a great deal of competition, not only in the marketplace, but amongst governments, ranking themselves, looking at different measurements across different domains. So the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity out of Toronto took a look at the prosperous regions within North America. They ranked them top 16, and Ontario finished 15th, and Quebec finished 16th. So they asked themselves the question, so why is that? What is this prosperity gap? And they found the prosperity gap is a productivity gap, and the productivity gap is an innovation gap. And so innovation is the top of minds for CEOs. 80% of CEOs say that innovation is their top priority. Now, one of the things that's interesting is when you ask people, do you do innovative things? Show of hands, how many people do innovative things within their organization? There's a few. Fantastic, fantastic. A lot of times I don't see that from a particular audience. And actually, I had a colleague of mine, he had a conversation with a particular organization, and he came out and he gave me a call. He said, John, I asked them if they innovate, and none of them could say they innovated. They said, no, we're not doing anything innovative. And I kind of shook my head because I recalled there were 5, 6, 7, 8 projects that this organization was doing that were fundamentally innovative, and they did not know that they were doing those things. So what's important is then, we define then what innovation means to us. It had the misfortune of being the 2010 one of the top 10 overused words. And so innovation really goes beyond those shiny objects. It goes beyond reaching a broader consumer base or broader customer base. It's perhaps reaching new customers, incremental changes to existing products, or perhaps process efficiencies. That's the Boston Consulting Group definition, and we need to look at innovation across those broad terms. And we need to look across not only in private sector, but also public sector as well. So new services, reaching out to new communities, consulting new organizations. So innovation spans that community. Now, innovation is not something that you simply pop up and say, okay, I'm going to be innovative today. It's like at Olympic sports. You have to practice. You have to build that innovation muscle. And if you don't exercise that innovation muscle, it atrophies. And so that when that challenge comes up, you're not going to be able to innovate. You're not going to be able to do that. Now, we're quite proud at Microsoft that when the times were tough, we doubled down on innovation. So for the last 4 years, last 5 years, we've invested heavily in research and development. $9 billion a year in research and development, helping our 850-plus researchers figure out what's next, figure out what's that next opportunity. And that's resulted in great rewards. When we look this year, we have our largest launch year in our history, over 30 new products coming out. And just on Friday, we're super excited about the new Windows 8 coming out and the new devices that are coming out. So this innovation has not only created new devices, new products, but it's transformed our organization, allowed us to reimagine that experience that a billion people enjoy on the desktop and through the cloud. We've transformed our organization to meet the challenges of the new technology era. And so we need to continue to invest in innovation. These tough and economic times are not the time to pull back. These tough economic times are the time to double down so that we're able to hit the ground running, to use that resource, that head start that we've been given here in Canada and in many other nations to innovate and to capture the hearts and minds of individuals as we go forward. Now, Canada is spiky. Of course, some people believe that, well, it's those towers in Toronto and Calgary that create the spikiness. Perhaps it's Signal Hill in Newfoundland, the Mount Barbeau in Nunavut, or even here in Montreal, that spikiness. But the spikiness is about the people. Bringing together that creative class. A big fan of Richard Florida, bringing together people. Let's not look at technology as that adjunct for people. Those conversations are still very, very important. We see the massively open online communities or curriculum for education. They're not going to supplant the universities. The universities are agora of ideas, people coming together for that adjacent innovation, sharing ideas between humanities, engineering, and science. Just earlier this year, the Mike and Orfea Lazaridis Center for Quantum Nano was opened up in Waterloo University. And it was at that intersection, kind of at the, right at that center point between the computing science department, the science department, and engineering department. And the idea was to bring people together for fast neuron conversations, to really innovate and grow those communities, to have a sustainable community, to be able to grow out that knowledge and expertise. Now, we're fortunate in Canada, and certainly around the world in many of the other regions, people love to live where they live. People love to live in Canada. They love the quality of life, love the climate, love the opportunities, the social system. The trick is to take that knowledge and project it around the world. So it's the bringing together of the spikiness of a region and the flatness of our world to be able to live where we want to and work wherever there's opportunity. And so we have the ability then to project Canadian excellence around the world, to take those things we're known for, education, healthcare, perhaps even natural resources, and be able to project that excellence around the world. Let's make that a little bit more real. At McMaster University, they have the Center for Minimal Access Surgery. Long name, essentially they do robotic surgeries. So they're able to have a surgeon in an operating theater remote from up north, and they're able to do an operation for someone that is not local to them, using some fantastic robotics and fantastic technologies. So that's interesting from a local resource perspective, but now imagine perhaps in times of crisis. So we all recall the devastating effects of the Haiti earthquake. If we put ourselves in the shoes of the aid agencies, before aid can actually leave to the people, the locals in Haiti, they have to supply the whole aid community that's there so that they're sustainable just in case something else happens. What if you could reduce the dependence on the number of people you actually have to send within the community? I'm not suggesting we put phone booths that are operating things like a vending machine. There'll still be people there to help people through that traumatic exercise of helping people with wellness. But if you can have a surgeon that is tireless, because you have shifts of surgeon in Canada that are able to do these remote operations, that are able then not to reduce that dependence on the supply chain, to reduce that long trail, can we not project our excellence around the world? Can we look at global approaches? So here we have what is a low-cost television antenna on a mountain in Venezuela, and it's sending Wi-Fi signals across to another mountain. Any idea how far they're sending these Wi-Fi signals? World record, 384 kilometers. Now that's a hot spot, right? I want to make sure you have your WPA2 on that one so that you don't have a whole bunch of people on that. Now, you look at that, you say, okay, so what can I do with that? Well, at the Aravind Eye Clinic in India, they've connected up 5-6 clinics using these technologies. Now that eye clinic does 300,000 eye operations every year. And they connect up to send medical imagery over these Wi-Fi connections. And so a great example of frugal innovation. You know, we don't need a gold-plated solution. We don't have to try to run fiber cable over the mountains. We have these solutions that are available to there. Now, you look at that and say, that's a great solution for India. You know, how does that relate to what we're doing here in Canada? Well, the CRTC says 90% of Canadians enjoy wireless access. And yet, that's only on 20% of our land mass. So 80% of Canada is not covered by this wireless access. Are there opportunities to adopt these solutions that are created elsewhere in the world to be able to connect up those last miles that we have here in Canada? It seems kind of unusual. Sometimes you say, well, we take our solutions and we project them elsewhere in the world. Let's adopt those solutions and project them within our environment. Creates opportunity across the globe. And when we look at these technologies, one of the things that becomes pretty intriguing is the transformation that it has on business. The way that we have conversations, the interaction between information and business, and we see new technologies and new conversations, new business models evolving. And so there's new conversations happening between the CEO and CIO. And what happens is we see that there's this adjacent innovation. You hear as common theme throughout my quick presentation this morning around, you know, how do we take those tough business challenges we have and apply technology to them? Now, I bumped into a great lady, Tanya Shaw, out in Halifax. She went through Dalhousie University as a pattern maker. And for the longest time, she made specialized patterns for Butterick and Simplicity. And don't ask why the gentleman on the stage knows about the pattern names, but it's a different story. But so she did custom patterns for Butterick and Simplicity. And one day, she was walking through airport security. And she had the good fortune to go through one of those little scanners to check out whether or not she had any devices that weren't permitted on board. And she got the opportunity to kind of look at the imagery. This was early on as they were deploying these things. And she said, you know what? That would be really, really helpful as I make my patterns. And she thought about the data that was behind it. She thought about the potential that she had for her business. And she created a business that worked on that data. And so allowing people to use that data that was collected from those scanners to be able to do online transactions with clothing companies. So a pattern maker taking data together, the power of IT, to transform business, to create this data-oriented business where she now is able to have a guaranteed size as people go to LL Bean, Land's End, The Gap online, be able to change that relationship from where people abandoned shopping carts 80% of the time to where now they do that actual committal transaction and only abandon 20% of the time. So transforming the way that we look at the world and transforming those conversations. We see more and more CEOs becoming those information professionals, understanding how information catalyzes their business, understanding the power of information as they look to go forward within different marketplaces. We also see the CIOs changing to business leaders as IT is becoming more of a commodity, not having to worry about the lights, not having to worry about the backups, being able to have the business value conversation, to be able to transform how we interact. And certainly we hear those conversations here in this room as we're changing that conversation away from the bits and bytes and looking how we change society, how we change that interaction between each other. Let's hear from Craig Mundy around some of those technology changes and how they will change the way that we look at the world around us.
Every year I hold one of these tech forums in order to try to share with journalists the kind of things that I think are going to be important in the next few years. The first is the evolution of natural user interface, or NUI as we call it. This is where we are teaching the computer to be more like people, making it have senses like sight and hearing and the ability to speak.
Let's go shopping. I'll follow your lead.
And with these things, we have really begun a path toward making it a lot easier for people to get the computer to do more for them. In addition, we're also now exploring what we think of as the physical world meeting the virtual world. And where all these things come together, we end up getting a computer that's just genuinely more like a helper and less like a tool. And we think that'll be important in expanding the impact of computing around the world and to many, many more people. The second major theme is big data and machine learning. Big data is what you get when you take these cloud-scale computing facilities and you start to ingest and organize very, very large amounts of data. And in the context of the cloud, as we call it, give people the ability to write their own applications to do analytics on them. That produces a lot of the standard types of business intelligence type of information that will be increasingly valuable, particularly to businesses. But more and more, there's another technology called machine learning, which we think is sort of extra special in the sense that it really allows the computer to be able to determine patterns or correlations from these very large data sets that people wouldn't be able to find themselves. We've been working for quite a few years on the development of Bing. One example of a place where Bing is being used as an infrastructure element is the recent release in Xbox 360 and Kinect of the Bing search engine. In particular, it has two components, the ability to do the speech recognition and the ability to incorporate domain-specific search, in this case, for entertainment products. So here, Bing becomes an infrastructural element in another product. The new tools for how people develop gestures in Kinect, the machine learns the gesture by you just teaching it that. And in a world which is increasingly highly instrumented, and we really are at a new era in the kinds of things people will be able to use their computers for. So what we see is now an architecture that increasingly looks like very intelligent client devices, your phone, your laptop, your slate and tablets, desktops, where Microsoft, I think, is in the best position to make sense out of your ecosystem of devices and to bring them together in friendly and cooperative ways, as opposed to leaving as an exercise for the user to try to figure out how to bring these things together and make sense out of it.
So you see some of the things they're working on at Microsoft Research and some of those advanced technologies that are coming down the pipe. Now, I mentioned beforehand that the CIO is having a different conversation. So let's make this technology real. Let's talk about how these technologies come together and change the way that we interact. So the natural user interface. Right after we released the Kinect, the good people at Sunnybrook Medical facility in Toronto, they actually took that Kinect and they hacked it. And they found a new way to use the Kinect for medical imagery. Now you can imagine the surgeons are in the operating room. It's a clean room environment, and as they are going to do that procedure, they have to remember the imagery that they saw before they entered the clean room, that sterile environment. And if they wanted to double check to make sure they had everything just right, they had to leave the clean environment, go look at the imagery, use the keyboard and mouse, and then come back in. So that lost precious time, and it didn't give them that real-time type of information that they required to be effective. And so they hacked the Kinects to allow them to use gestures to be able to go through medical images while they're in the operating theater. And so not having to leave the operating theater, save that precious time, and have the information readily at their fingertips. The researchers at Purdue have gone one step further, and they've got a medical device robot that actually will retrieve instruments on behalf of the surgeon. So having that extra arm within the operating theater to help out, to be able to share that information. Now you saw the Bing on Xbox, and you say, well, that's great. You can look at movies and try to find your music files. The key thing there was the context-sensitive search, and to be able to do voice recognition and to have that more natural experience with the computing environment. Again, let's put that in the medical center and have the then surgeon be able to call up particular things on file. Hey, did we do this? Did we see this? Find me information about how I do this procedure to be able to save that time. In Alberta Health Services, they've got tool sets that they've put in place that have actually saved them one surgeon's salary. Well, let me put it back. Let me spin that back. In Alberta Health Services, they found that surgeons were taking about 40 minutes to log in on computers throughout the day. They had about 200 different logins, and as you added that up, it's about 40 minutes a day that they required to log in and get all their files and documents up and loaded. By being able to predict who was coming in the environment, they were able to reduce that 40 minutes down to literally seconds to give people the ability, the computing ability, to follow them around the hospital. And so they were able then to save then a full doctor shift throughout the day by being able to streamline that approach. So natural user interface has the opportunity and has the potential to change the way that we interact with computing devices. We've heard a lot about cloud and cloud computing, how it's transforming how we do our business, transforming how we consume cloud computing services, making computing as easy to use as electricity, plug in and go. We hear about how entrepreneurs are building their business in the cloud, no longer having to use that venture capital money for capital expenditures to buy those servers, to buy that email, having much better control over their cash flow. As we look at the cloud services, we have to look at the worldwide cloud services and being able to project your know-how around the world through the use of these tools. Unfortunately, we find that there are some borders coming up in cyberspace, and that cloud is being fragmented, so that some organizations aren't being able to seize the opportunity of cloud, of worldwide cloud services. Now, cloud has a huge potential for jobs. When we looked at the worldwide community, we feel that cloud is going to be directly responsible for 1 million new jobs, 100,000 new companies. Now, these aren't all IT companies. Being able to make better use or faster and efficient use of computing now allows the carpenter not to worry about their financial program, to worry about their mailouts, and perhaps they have more time to help that apprentice along. It helps the beauty salon hire new people because they're now no longer concerned about how they run their environment. It allows companies in Canada and around the world project their know-how around the world so they can have the big, bold, audacious goals of not being the best in their region, but being the best worldwide. And as we look at the opportunities for that transformation in business, a lot of the jobs are moving. So they're not going to be there running the facilities. We now build containerized cloud services. So it's a box, there's not even a building around it, so fundamentally changes that model. Where now we can have developers building on top of the cloud servers, adding value to the business and growing out that side. So the opportunity in the clouds are huge if we provide that environment with the minimal policy friction that is possible. Consumerization is key. Individuals wanting to have the same capability in their offices as they do in their homes. Being able to share those devices, use low-cost devices in the environment. Yesterday at the lunch panel session, you heard about the instrumentation of the world, or perhaps the Internet of Things. Seeing more and more embedded devices. Seeing medical devices. In the Microsoft Health Vault system, we have over 50 different medical devices, from peak flow meters, glucose meters, heart rate monitors, weight scales. I don't have the weight scale, but we have weight scales in this environment. We're able to help people with wellness, have better control and insight into their environment. Be able to share that information across different communities so that we can have that better point of care, so that we can advise people, hey, you know what? You don't need to come into the emergency room. Simply take your asthma medication and things should be good. So being able to have that sentience in the environment, be able to have the knowledge of when that pothole pops up in the road and be able to fix that pothole. So the sensorization in that environment has dramatic impact on our community and the way that we look at computing. Big data. We've heard a lot about big data. Craig Mundy talked about big data, and we've talked about big data during the conference. But do we really understand what big data means? So let me take you back in time. We'll wave out here. We'll go back in time. Now think back to the 1300s. 1300s, pretty bleak period in Europe. A lot of people keeling over. It was the heydays of the Black Plague. Pretty awful time. People not sure what was going on. So let's say you were a poor, unfortunate soul that got the Black Plague. What would you do? Well, you'd go to your local barber, because your local barber is the best medical advice in town. So the local barber would look at the tools that they had in their arsenal, and, well, what kind of tools did they have? They had some knives, they had some boards with nails on them, because bloodletting was all the fame, a couple leeches there, and that's because they thought it was black bile and red bile and other things that were in the body that caused these horrific ailments. And, well, if the cure didn't kill you, they didn't have a good chance to survive through that environment. Fast forward then, some 300 years, and you have Van Leeuwen from Holland, and you have Galileo from Italy, looking through some lenses, the early form of the microscope. And so they look through this microscope and they say, well, hold on a second here. That blood isn't black bile. That blood isn't red bile. There's all these different things and all these different components. Start to get a better understanding of the world around us by looking through that. I'm sure all of us in the room remember the first time we looked through the microscope and how amazed we were. We're probably about 3-4 years old when that happened, so we don't really have that sense. And so I put this picture of the Crab Nebula up here on the stage, and really some of those early pictures from the Hubble telescope. It says, wow. I remember when I first saw this picture, it's, wow, that's out there? We're able to see this in the world around us? Big data provides us the same wow factor, that same ability to have a new view of the world around us, to do things that were previously unimaginable. There's a small company in Toronto, DMTI. They do geographic intelligence. They were asked by the Ontario Medical Association to do a study. Find the distance between every postal code within the province of Ontario, because they're trying to figure out where the best location would be to locate their medical clinics for time of service and the community at large. So when they first looked at this many years ago, they found it would take 280 years of traditional compute power to be able to figure that tough problem out. They put it in the cloud, and they constrained it, but in the cloud it took them 6 days. Came out with a database with over 14 billion entries, but allowed the Ontario Medical Association to use this data then to figure out how best to provide care to Ontarians. So big data has huge potential to allow us to look at the world in new and amazing ways. So those are some of the trends that we see happening and trying to make them real, to try to get them into the business context, and how do we change society and reimagine how we provide those services. Now, earlier, Minister Clement talked about government and innovation. And Tom Jenkins from OpenText has often talked about the need for foundational layers to be innovative and to be productive in order to help those higher order layers to be innovative and productive and competitive in the marketplace. And I would submit that having a competitive government, having great government services helps Canadian business, helps Canadian individuals be more competitive in the global scene. Now, I've been tracking the open government movement. I've actually created an open government timeline that follows back and traces the history of open government and open data in Canada back to the 90s when Natural Resources Canada started publishing some of their data sets. And we see that groundswell that started in Nanaimo and went through Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and I apologize if I miss cities out there that have open government and open data activities. We see the provinces catching hold, with British Columbia having a minister of open government. We see the federal government moving forward with that. We see that partnership then of the community and government working together. Here in Montreal, Michael Mully created openparliament.ca. And for the first few years that he was running that, he had to do some pretty sophisticated manipulation to be able to share the conversations that were happening within the Canadian Parliament. So going through some structured documents and doing some pretty sophisticated programming to do that. And as Mr. Clement mentioned earlier this morning with the House of Commons website, they've gone and taken an innovative approach, not just videos on that site. They've made their whole site XML and been able then to publish information so it's easier to make use of. So now the community doesn't have to go through strange manipulations. That information is readily available so that they can share that. And I encourage people when they look at open data to look beyond simply that bucket of bits that's there as a repository, that CSV and that KML file, and look at different ways that we can present that information to allow it to be more usable. Because when we look at those buckets of data that are out there, often they're not accessed as often as we'd like. And so are there means and mechanisms where we can move that forward? We also see government innovation around changing service models. In Ontario government, they now have a service guarantee for birth certificates. It's almost like the half hour or less, or it's free. But it's 10 days or less, or it's free. So that service guarantee is there, changing the way that they look at government. We see service consolidation, really leading the world around how you do shared service delivery and transform the way that you do the business of government. As we see these technologies there, as we see the innovation that's happening, we see that we need people to bring these innovations forward. And we see that in a sense we're at a crisis point within the community. There's a paradox right now in the marketplace. We have unemployment, relatively high unemployment, and yet at the same time, we have a skills deficit. The skills aren't there to meet the needs and meet the demand. This is particularly acute with young people, finding that the unemployment rate for young people, so people under 34, is twice that of the published unemployment rate. When we talk to the Canadian Literacy and Learning Network, they suggest that 48% of Canadians have low literacy rates. 48%. And that out of that 48%, 80% of those people are unemployed. And so those are the people that are most hard hit. But there's some good news. There's some light at the end of the tunnel. A 1% increase in literacy has an $18 billion positive impact on our economy every year. So if we can bump that literacy rate up by 1%, we're able then to have a great impact on our economy. And so Microsoft looked at this around the world and we said, we need to empower our youth. We need to create opportunities for our youth. So we created the Youth Spark program. And it's a program where we commit to creating opportunities for 300 million youth around the world in the next 3 years. So focusing our efforts around helping youth seize the opportunity that's there. We've created a micro-giving site, Give for Youth, where people can donate for youth programs, and there's matching funds that are there. We created another site to bring together and share opportunities, Innovate for Youth. Innovate for Good, that allows then people to show neat projects and allow people to solve societal challenges through a crowdsourced type model. And we've created a hub, a portal, where it allows people to come together and see those programs that are available for their individual communities. Now that's on a worldwide basis. How does that land here in Canada? We're working with a fantastic organization called Frontier College here in Canada. Now Frontier College helps people with low literacy then get the skills they need to conduct or complete some common tasks that they have before them. Perhaps it's getting a driver's license so they can be gainfully employed. Perhaps it's raising their learning level, their reading level, so they can go back to university or high school, or back to high school. And they do this on a one-to-one basis because you can appreciate people that have those low literary skills need to have that extra care. You can't simply give them a manual. You can't simply give them an automated tool to have them step through. You need that one-to-one relationship. And through the use of tools like Microsoft Link, we're able to continue that one-to-one relationship, augment that personal interaction that's so important, or as we exchange ideas, augment that personal interaction to help people then move forward. And so we see great potential then in helping our youth and helping then create that community to succeed as we move forward. So we're at a crossroads. We're at a point in time where we need to decide what we're going to do. We've had a lot of conversations here. We've heard about societal challenges. We need to decide how we're going to act. Are we going to change the way that we interact? Are we going to build in place those programs that make societal differences? Are we going to look at policies in different ways so that we can have that global success? Are we going to look globally as we look to seize the opportunity of the digital economy? Are we going to empower our youth and allow them to seize the opportunity that's before them? When we meet in Mexico in a few short years, I'll ask the question again, have we done that and have we seized that opportunity? Thanks so much.